Cinema relationship to architecture
Yeah,
is very, very important.
yeah.
And there is an architectural form of expression that is key to Ray's cinema as well. Lovely to be here.
When I say Mr. Satyajit Ray, one of India's leading filmmakers, I'm very curious to also know that besides being a leading filmmaker, how do you perceive him as a human?
He's India's most well known filmmaker historically. It's very difficult to surpass the kind of stature he acquired globally, internationally, and sort of in India too. And so much has been written about him that, by cinephiles, by enthusiasts, by critics, by scholars. So it's almost as if everything that had to be ever said about Ray has already been said. And yet, almost every year, when I teach or when others encounter his work or remember his work, new things arise. Now, my relationship to Ray, I come from a Bengali family, so obviously Ray played a very important role in our household. And I didn't grow up in Calcutta, neither do I read and write Bengali. I speak Bengali, but I don't read and write Bengali. I lived in Delhi all my life. So I heard about Ray from my family. Then we started watching these films, and later when I became an academic, first I became a filmmaker, then I became an academic. Then when I encountered Ray's cinema, I mean, I was astounded by the range. And for me, in my own scholarship, I have always privileged the notion of space over narrative in cinema. And I found in Ray's work an deep interest in environmental aesthetics as well as a deep interest in space and atmosphere that really drew me to his work. And while the notion of realism has overdetermined the way in which people have talked about Ray's cinema, for me, really, it's the role of spatial aesthetics in his films that have made him so important for me to also engage with his work. And when I say spatial aesthetics or atmosphere or environmental aesthetics, I mean all kinds of environments, interior geographies, I mean urban landscapes in his Calcutta trilogy, rural landscapes, encounter with tribals in Days and Nights in the Forests, encounter with the mountain region in Kanchenjunga. His whole language was deeply, deeply cinematic, and it was not just about telling a story.
Yeah,
It was about the craft.
yeah. His whole language was deeply, deeply cinematic. So when you were actually studying him, trying to understand him deeply, what do you think he perhaps would have the habits that would make him so deeply cinematic as a filmmaker? What kind of habits?
Well, I think Ray was also a very important figure in the film society movement in India. So he played a very important role, and during his time as part of film society culture, they also saw a lot of films, international films, and I suppose when he was growing up, Hollywood's presence was huge in India, and he was very influenced by Hollywood cinema, European art cinema traditions, Italian neorealism, of course,
Yeah.
and comedy. And he was really drawn to. He was a kind of well-read person. Came from advertising. And had a kind of eclectic way of engaging with different kinds of forms and writings, and also did sketching, and his talent for music was also very important because, I was watching all these films all over again for today's podcast,
Yeah.
and I was quite amazed at how, the background music that Ray used, it was meant for cinema. It wasn't just a musical score that he liked. It really helped to amplify the
Mm,
spatial aesthetics of his craft,
mm,
and that sound design. That not enough has been said about how important sound design was in his craft.
yeah. Yeah.
So he's a world filmmaker in that sense.
Yeah. So when you watch Ray's films and what you've perceived in terms of the audience, the way they react to Ray's cinema, and till now, so much of admiration for Ray. Would you say he was a filmmaker who was from Kolkata in a more Bengali way, or do you think he was a filmmaker of India? How would you classify that?
I think both.
Mm.
I think I would say both. India is made up of different states and languages and all. So I think both. I think he had a very deep understanding of the Bengali middle and upper middle class,
Mm.
some of their shallowness, uh, that he was very sharp about these
Yes.
characteristics,
Yeah.
and he would. It wasn't judgmental. It wasn't judgment,
Yeah.
but it was an ability to look at surfaces and through a kind of gestural economy, dig deep into where and how these characters emerged from.
Yeah.
He was a somebody who understood the role of gestures,
Mm-hmm.
who understood the role of
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
way the eyes moved,
Yeah.
placing characters in space. All of this was very important for him, and that's how he succeeded. And it's not just one or two different. It's hard to really classify his filmmaking because he did so many different things, from
Yeah.
horror to urban films about political turmoil, focus on women, um, um, looking at the early 20th century zamindari system, in the music room.
Wide
There's
range.
a wide range.
If we are watching films as an international audience, and when we see films like Charulata, or we see Devi, or we see Nayak, or we see any other of Ray's films, do we see Kolkata there, or do we see India there?
That's a difficult question. I think as I said,
Yeah.
it's a little bit of both.
Hmm.
It's a little bit of both,
Hmm.
and some of the experiences that he touches upon, whether
Yeah.
it's in Devi, or in women's desire. These are pretty universal
Universal.
themes
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
domesticity,
Yeah.
and problems of marriage,
Yeah.
romance. All of these themes are also very important. And, in his urban trilogy, starting with The Adversary, Pratidwandi, all those three films that he made set in Calcutta,
Hmm.
they look at political turmoil in the city of Calcutta.
Yeah.
And at the same time, in the 1970s, we have other films made in other parts of the world that are also looking at political turmoil in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
There is a connection.
Yeah.
So you don't become an international filmmaker and recognized for your work if you are just making films about India with an Indian audience in mind.
Yeah.
He was able to bridge. and
Yeah.
cross borders.
Yeah, and also Bengali society in terms of understanding, it's very much ahead with their culture.
Hmm.
So the whole equation between people, the way they are so well read, the way they are so enriched in their own language and culture, do you feel they are way ahead in terms of perhaps a lot of other Indian ness, or the little things that perhaps make you Indian, but you're not at that level in terms of your understanding and your richness of culture, in terms of the way you're well read, the way you absorb culture.
I think in Bengal, the thing was, and especially for Ray's generation, he was also very westernized.
Yeah.
That generation, they were exposed to literature from all over the world and musical traditions,
Yes.
films. So he was embedded in various kinds of cultural practices and art
Hmm.
as well. And so I think that the education, his own education or his own location, as coming from a privileged background,
Yeah.
gave him a certain kind of exposure.
Yeah.
uh, but you see, he gave him a certain kind of exposure, but it is amazing his ability to observe
Yeah.
and capture the experiences of also the disenfranchised. I mean,
Yeah.
that he managed to do very, very well
Yeah.
in so many of his films.
Yeah. Tell me, Ranjani, in terms of the cinematic spaces, the way he filmed it, the way he imagined it, like the corridors, the windows in Charulata, or the haunting interiors in Devi, or the moving train in Nayak. How do you think Ray would be working on these cameras and spaces? Do you think there was a way to approach it, or do you think it was more that came from the subconscious mind while he was absorbing all these different art forms?
See, I believe, and this is part of my own engagement with cinema,
Yeah.
that cinema relationship to architecture
Yeah.
is very, very important.
Yeah.
And there is an architectural form of expression that is key to Ray's cinema as well.
Yeah.
And and you cannot underestimate the collaboration he had with Bansi Chandragupta, his art director
Yeah.
and production designer,
Yeah.
who, with Ray's own ability to draw and communicate what he actually required,
Yeah.
and Bansi Chandragupta's ability to make it possible to create those imaginary spaces, uh, or imagined spaces, helped raise cinema considerably. Now, look at these two films, Mahanagar, made in 1963, and Charulata, 1964. I think that's 64. And two different kinds of backgrounds. One is the kind of, almost like a Victorian interior with wallpaper, furniture that refers to a certain period, a kind of affluent life in which boredom and distance is being communicated through the kind of movement that
Yeah.
Charu has
Yes.
in the interior. But
Yes.
there's a very well-known scene in the film where the husband Bhupati is talking to um, Amol and saying that he's been betrayed by his family relative and swindled by his relative, and he says that I'm shocked that a family member has done this to him. And by which time there is chemistry, and Charu has fallen in love with Amol, and there is obviously forbidden love hovering in the horizon. And he's standing at the door, and the camera shows her at the end of the corridor,
Yeah.
and there is this Bhupati on the inside. And this is architectural expression, the kind of way in which Amal is torn apart in this kind of triangular situation. And that's the moment that he realizes he has to leave the house. Otherwise, it will become a double betrayal for his brother,
Yeah.
cousin. So
Yeah.
that's a very important sequence in the film, and the whole film is actually architecturally conceived through its interior geography with
Yeah.
some outdoor spaces of the garden where the swing is, and
Yeah.
the swing plays an important role. But
Yeah.
in Mahanagar, it's a lower middle class house. It's very cluttered, very claustrophobic, and you see fabric everywhere, clothes piled up, curtains, thin curtains everywhere, a clutter of objects, utensils, barely enough place to move, and the framing is exactly the opposite of Charulata.
Yeah.
This is really architectural expression.
It's beautifully explained. So, Ray creating psychological states through these physical spaces.
Hmm.
So, what goes behind the amount of work that it takes for a director like Ray to create these psychological states? What is the way to think to be able to do that?
I mean, it's every director has his or her own way of, I suppose,
Yeah.
evolving uh, something like this. And human characters play such an important role in race. I mean, the
Yeah.
cast of characters that we have encountered through his cinema,
Yeah.
there each is a well-defined, well-edged character, and uh, sometimes amusing, sometimes tragic, sometimes you know, villainous, all kinds, and but believable. That
Yeah.
you feel that you have met these people somewhere.
Yeah.
These kinds of characters. I'm not so sure that I can actually pinpoint something
Sure.
very specific in terms of how he evolved his characters. But I
Sure.
think he did not think about cinema only in terms of characters. He saw it com- as a language,
Yeah.
and in that language, characters were important, but they would only emerge as characters through his cinematic language. And so, to me, it's more interesting to reflect on the ways in which he created his craft to allow these characters to perform.
Tell me, Ranjani, when you see the swing shot, which I'm actually pretty fascinated by, and whenever I talk to people outside about Charulata, they that's a shot everybody, most of the people go to. When we see that shot, what do you, as somebody who is on the other side, what is it that you feel? What is it that perhaps he wanted the audience to feel in that shot?
Um, I don't know that he was expecting a universal, uniform,
Hmm.
fine kind of response,
Yeah.
but he obviously had an intellectual vision that goes into the swing, because the film is so much about a kind of physical geography of the house interior, and being feeling trapped and bored in that life,
Yeah.
and the imagination is free,
Hmm.
and the ability to imagine and dream and think of other worlds, all this happens on the swing,
Yeah.
and conversations, etc. And that is where she realizes there's attraction. The
Yeah.
first time she realizes she has attraction, and that is the swing where or there's a flashback, a kind of flashback to her own childhood, and where you see very different kind of the water, the river, people, rituals, children, you the Ferris wheel, so you see a kind of play and imaginary wandering into the past, which is also very spatially crafted in that sequence, which is so different from the world she is in now. And that's why I think people have really looked at that sequence very carefully, because Ray's trying to think about her own disposition. There's a German philosopher,
Hmm.
a sociologist rather, wrote in the 1920s and 30s, George Simmel. He had a very well-known essay called "The Metropolis and Mental Life,"
Mm-hmm.
and how the urban experience gradually emerges through this kind of mental landscape. How do you experience the world around you as inner life?
Mm,
And
mm,
so,
mm.
how do you depict inner lives?
Yeah,
And Ray's ability to depict these inner lives
yeah,
using space and architecture and
yeah,
music, all
yeah.
of that was
Beautiful.
tremendous.
Beautiful, Ranjani, that inner life
Yeah.
depiction by Ray. So when he understood, so I have a total fascination for Charulata, and just continuing with that a bit more in terms of understanding the female loneliness and
Mm.
so deeply understanding it, which means that what kind of emotional intelligence would he would have, what kind of observant observing skills he would have as a filmmaker to be able to actually penetrate into a character so deeply. uh, what do you think is the kind of observation skills that perhaps he would have developed in human psychology?
I mean, it is quite amazing actually his ability to understand women
Yeah.
in so many of his. Now, it's not just Charulata, as
Hmm.
I said, Mahanagar. It's also there in the Apu trilogy.
Yeah.
Mahanagar, where this woman, Madhavi Mukherjee, decides to get a job, and it ruffles the feathers at home because women don't work in the 1950s, and especially in a lower middle class home like that. So
Yeah.
it's there in Mahanagar, it's there in Charulata, it's there in Kanchanjunga, it's there in Nayak. Look at the female characters, even in Nayak, Sharmila Tagore's character. So I think this is a bit, there is a kind of Bengal story here, I think, because of the women's reform, etc., were considered important in the during the Bengal Renaissance period, during the national movement. And historians, people like Partha Chatterjee and all, have written about how during the nationalist movement, the women's question became marginal because other issues came to the fore, and so she was domesticated, and the public world was the world of politics and change.
Hmm.
And so, in some ways, their concerns were sacrificed in the interest of nationalism. And
Hmm.
another friend of mine, Ravi Vasudevan, who's also a scholar,
Hmm.
wrote a very nice article talking about how, in all these women characters, we are revisiting the unfinished agenda of history, and we are
Hmm.
re-evoking. And this is the unconscious of the past, which has not been resolved, comes to the forefront in all these female characters in Ray's cinema. And
Hmm.
the fact that he was able to understand this and raise all these issues in his filmmaking was quite amazing.
Mm, lovely, lovely. Ranji, tell me, you have been on the other side of the camera as well. You have directed, you've made documentaries, and then you went into the academic side. If when you look back, when you see, when you study, when you analyze, what do you see in terms of one skill, of directing that perhaps audiences don't notice, but people like directors like Ray and scholars like you actually see? What is that in invisible skill?
I'm very happy that I was first trained as a filmmaker
Hmm, hmm,
and not the other way around.
hmm.
Because I was trained as a filmmaker, but I was trained in the early 80s as a filmmaker because I joined the Mass Communication Center at Jamia
Wow.
in 1984, I think, for an MA.
Hmm,
And because of that, you know, when I look at films, I almost become, obsessed with the way the camera is moving.
hmm,
So that's why the spatial logic is very important for me. I
Yeah.
never get carried away by just the narrative, because for me
Mm,
it's very important to understand how all these layers operate together on screen. And that was part of my interest in the city in cinema as well, my first book. That I see film as a fan, as a critic, and
yeah.
as a scholar. I think there is a
Lovely.
thing
Yeah.
of all of this is part of my own engagement with films. And I watch all
Lovely.
kinds of films.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely. So, Ranjani, tell me in terms of Ray's involvement with Western classical music, literature, European cinema, and at the same time, he deeply was rooted in the Indian tradition in Kolkata. He was balancing it just right, you know. How do you think that that amalgamation was working for him? You know, how was he making it work? Taking from the Western, absorbing from the Western, but the yet being deeply rooted in his own language, like creating his own language, which every artist constantly works towards.
So I think that is the whole reality of post-colonial life.
Hmm.
200 years of colonial rule.
Yeah.
Uh, what is a cultural context?
Hmm.
The local is already refracted
Hmm.
through so many international currents.
Hmm.
So it's very important to understand that as a filmmaker, not just Ray, but even others also,
Hmm.
there is always a kind of transnational imagination at work.
Hmm.
It's not about trying to be local or trying to be authentic.
Yeah.
It's about imaginatively engaging with
Hmm.
different kinds of experiences.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
once that is the project, it doesn't become about should it be like this in India or should it be like that,
Yeah.
because it's a process.
Yeah.
And I think his location is important because he was exposed to all kinds of artistic and literary and musical traditions, cinematic traditions, and that gave him a certain kind of ability to speak to a range of audiences, because he was a very successful, he had a huge audience in Bengal.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the educated and the
Elite.
cultural elite.
Yeah.
He had an audience. They were
Yes.
proud of him as a
Yes.
filmmaker.
Yeah.
But and even in the rest of the country, he
Yeah.
has a following. He
Yeah.
has had a following. May not be a mass following, but he
Yeah.
is a recognized, very important filmmaker.
Very important voice
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
cinema. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And even
What?
today, when you watch his films, you don't get the feeling that we are watching something very dated. That is the beauty of his films, that they are far-sighted, future-oriented, and apprehending a world to come.
Yeah, yeah, they have got high level of empathy in them, you know. So
Yeah.
whatever generation watches it, because like you said, you know, it's the inner life that is captured so beautifully that it becomes actually universal, and everyone is going to identify with it.
Um,
What about Kurosawa? What do you think of Kurosawa's influence
Well,
on
after he saw
filmmakers?
Rashomon,
Yeah,
Ray saw Rashomon, he realized that you could actually make a film which is very rooted in something specifically regional or locational,
hmm.
and yet manage to have an impact in the world. And which is one of the reasons I think those two filmmakers have been compared a lot, because they both got global recognition.
Yeah,
They're big filmmakers.
yeah,
No.
yeah, yeah, totally. We have been talking about Ghatak, and this is the time when I want to bring Ghatak out, you know, one of my favorite filmmakers. And what are your thoughts? You have, you know, read, you have understood Ghatak. much more than a lot of people around me. What do you think could perhaps be, uh, a kind of a relationship between Ghatak and Ray? And if you had to, I hate using the word compare, if you had to kind of put the two of them together, how would you, go through these two filmmakers without comparing them? It'll be so sad if we have to compare these two great filmmakers.
So there was a time because Ghatak did not get the kind of recognition
Yeah,
Ray got during
yeah,
his lifetime. So
yeah,
it all came later,
yeah,
and it was huge. Once
yeah,
those retrospectives were held, and he got all his recognition much later. And
yeah,
he didn't have the same body of filmmaking. He had some, but you could there were Ray had Ray had an opportunity to make a large number of films. So when I was a student, I remember they were like cult followers, either the Ray followers or the Ghatak followers, and they were always arguing with each other. And the Ghatak followers would see Ghatak as more important, and the Ray followers would obviously see Ray as more important. And it was quite tiresome actually
yeah,
to listen to this over the years and realize they're very they're different types of filmmakers.
yeah,
Ghatak was um, kind of a tortured filmmaker, and that tortuous experience of the partition plays a very important role in his filmmaking. So a
yeah,
wound is being
yeah, yeah,
given form in his
yeah,
films, and there are men. He was absolutely brilliant in his filmmaking. And so I think Ghatak should be viewed as a different kind of filmmaker, equally important and masterful, different kind of framing strategy, different approach to characterization and
totally, yeah,
everything. And also, very important sound, all of that. And the comparison is unfortunate because they're both Bengali and making films at the same time. And Ghatak did say at his funeral, not Ray said at Ghatak's funeral that when cinema history is written, that Ghatak will be recognized as a Bengali filmmaker, very who understood.
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I think Ghatak would also manage to communicate to the world
yeah.
in his filmmaking and very, very powerfully. And he was also very cinematic filmmaker.
Oh
So
yes,
they both came to cinema in different ways. And I think it dilutes the work of each by
yeah.
bringing them together for a comparison because they're actually very different filmmakers.
Economic situation of a filmmaker, the environment from where the filmmaker is coming plays a huge role in how they are envisioning a story and how they are imagining. And these two were like in a complete different poles apart when it came to the environment from where they actually came.
So yeah, that they came from different backgrounds, and one was political filmmaker. So Ghatak's own background and all of that was important. But this is the problem when we reduce filmmaking to just the individual director.
Mm,
Film Ultimately, filmmaking is a hugely collaborative practice. It
yeah.
cannot be enacted. It cannot be created on with the work of just one person. It's not a painting.
Mm,
It's not like writing a book. It's a hugely collaborative practice, and so unfortunately, what happens is that we tend to see screen images as if they are the result that we see on screen is created because of that one person,
yeah.
and that's the kind of obsession with auteurs and directors in world cinema. But as I gave you the example, the collaboration with Bansi Chandragupta, the collaboration with his cinematographer,
Yeah.
and the sound recordist. These were very, very important elements in Ray's work as well. And
Mm,
it not enough has been done to actually pull those stories into the assessment, because
mm,
then we will really understand why film operates at a different level altogether.
mm, mm,
So even though they came from different backgrounds
mm.
and they produce different kinds of filmmaking, I think it would be interesting to see then budgets. For instance, filmmaking budgets are very critical in what the film is
Yeah.
going to look like. And also, having been a practitioner once upon a time
Yeah.
of documentaries,
Yeah.
and knowing how filmmakers work,
Yeah.
there's never anything called a plan that is produced exactly in the way the filmmaker had planned it.
Yeah.
Contingency plays an important role in how decisions are taken, and you must know this
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
And so, because of those things, it's becomes irrelevant after a while to find those direct connections.
Mm. Yeah.
As important though they may be, I'm
Yeah.
more interested in all the other elements that come together
Yeah.
around this figure to make the figure what he or she becomes.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of permutations and
Yeah.
combinations. Right now, Ranjani, are working in a very beautiful setup, which is writing a book on black and white to color, which is something very fascinating for me as a filmmaker as well. So I'm not going to like ask you too many questions about it because your book is still under printing. But if I had to just ask one question about your book, and that is that how did color change the emotional and the perceptual experience of cinema? If I had to ask you in a few words or just one word, how would that be? What would
It,
that be?
well, it was huge. It was what I call a chromatic surge.
Yeah,
uh, the
yeah,
transition from black and white to color
yeah.
was huge in the ninth. I mean, in India, the transition to color is a bit late in the 60s, though we had experiments and we have films in color before that, but
Mm,
you can count them on your fingers. The real transition happens in the 1960s. And
mm,
actually, in that context, I'll tell you, Days and Nights in the Forest
mm.
is
Yeah,
that's a film with Tagore, who's already a big star in Bombay cinema
yeah,
in that period of the 60s.
yeah,
Um, that film, if you look at Ray's craft in that film, he's almost moving against the way in which the popular
yeah,
had used geographical spaces, travel, and locations after the arrival of color, because he was very hostile
yeah,
to the coming of color initially. He thought it was going to just become a song and dance spectacle. And, I don't agree with Ray's approach to the popular at all. I've never agreed with his dismissive attitude. It's a very Bengali tradition to do that as well, to reject the popular
yeah,
completely.
yeah,
But he was not able to get away from it, because I know that he really liked Sholay. He liked
yeah.
Sholay because of its craft, the way
Mm,
it's the
mm, mm,
space, sound, editing, all of that.
mm.
So I think if you look at Days and Nights in the Forest, which is 1969 or 70, shot at the peak of in Bombay cinema's transition to color,
Yeah.
and place the film in relation to what was going on in the popular, you can see how his aesthetic strategy
Mm,
is deliberately framed to distance the structure
mm,
from what had become the overwhelming form in Bombay cinema.
mm, mm.
Yeah.
Lovely, Ranjani. So, just to end the conversation, if you had to recommend three Ray films to the Gen Z generation, what would those be?
Charulata,
Mm,
Days and Nights in the Forest,
yeah.
and The Adversary, Pratidwandi,
Pratik.
because this would give the range.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ranjani. I really, really appreciate your time and coming on our podcast and doing this.
Thank